A millionaire signs a contract and accepts a virgin woman as payment. In the millionaire's luxurious mansion, dark secrets lurked behind every locked door. The millionaire claimed her as his, imposing rules she dared not break. But when an anonymous warning appeared, she realized she was trapped in something far more dangerous than she had ever imagined. The Manhattan skyline gleamed in the afternoon sun as Eliza Bennett stared out the window of the sleek black car. She should have felt something, fear perhaps, or at least apprehension, but all she could muster was a hollow resignation. The car turned onto Fifth Avenue, weaving through the busy streets of New York City, taking her to a meeting that would change her life forever. "We're almost there, Miss Bennett," the driver announced, his eyes briefly meeting hers in the rear-view mirror. Eliza nodded, clutching her leather portfolio tighter. Inside was the contract, the document that would save her family but claim her freedom. The Bennetts had been a respected name in New York's financial circles for generations, until her father's risky investments and the economic crash had brought everything crashing down. The family business that had stood for over a century was weeks away from bankruptcy, their reputation in tatters, and her parents' health deteriorating from the stress. The car pulled up to an imposing skyscraper that seemed to touch the clouds. The Blackwood Building, headquarters of Blackwood Enterprises, and home to the man who had offered salvation at an unusual price. "Mr. Blackwood is expecting you on the top floor," the driver said, opening her door. Taking a deep breath, Eliza stepped out, her heels clicking against the pavement. The security guards nodded respectfully as she entered the building, as if they already knew who she was. The elevator ride to the top floor felt eternal, giving her time to question her decision once more. Was there another way? She had spent months looking for alternatives, approaching banks, investors, even distant relatives. But William Blackwood had been the only one to extend a hand, with conditions that had nothing to do with money. The elevator doors opened to reveal a minimalist reception area. A poised woman with an impeccable bob cut stood to greet her. "Miss Bennett, welcome to Blackwood Enterprises. Mr. Blackwood is ready for you." She followed the assistant down a long corridor. The walls were adorned with modern art that probably cost more than what could save her family's entire business. When they reached the massive double doors at the end of the hallway, the assistant knocked once before opening them. "Miss Bennett has arrived, sir." The office was vast, with floor-to-ceiling, windows offering a panoramic view of the city, and there, standing with his back to her, was William Blackwood, the reclusive billionaire whose name carried weight in every boardroom in America. "Thank you, Charlotte. That will be all," he said without turning. The doors closed behind Eliza with a soft click. For a moment, neither spoke. Then, slowly, he turned to face her. William Blackwood was younger than she had expected, perhaps in his late 30s. His dark hair was impeccably styled, and his tailored suit accentuated his athletic build. But it was his eyes that captured her attention, steel gray, calculating and strangely familiar, as if she should recognize them from somewhere. "Miss Bennett," he finally said, his voice deep and controlled. "I was beginning to wonder if you would come. I didn't have much choice, did I, Mr. Blackwood?" A hint of a smile touched his lips. "We always have choices, Miss Bennett. They're just not always equally appealing." He gestured toward the sitting area, where a contract lay open on the glass table. "Please, have a seat. Would you like something? To drink?" "No, thank you. I'd prefer to get this over with." He nodded, studying her with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. "Your directness is refreshing. Most people who come to this office try to impress me with small talk." "I'm not here to impress you. I'm here because you're holding my family's future hostage." His expression hardened slightly. "That's a rather dramatic interpretation. I'm offering a solution to a problem you created, or rather, your father created. And your solution requires me to essentially sign my life over to you," Eliza replied, opening her portfolio and placing her copy of the contract next to his. "A year of my life, living under your roof, following your rules, with no explanation as to why." William sat across from her, one leg crossed over the other, the picture of calm confidence. "I've been transparent about the terms. 1 year in my household, acting as my companion at social events, nothing more. In return, your family's debts will be paid, your company restructured, and your parents' medical bills covered. He leaned forward slightly. You've read the non-disclosure agreement. Everything that happens remains between us. Why me? Eliza asked, the question that had been haunting her for weeks. You could have anyone. Models, actresses, socialites. Why choose someone from a failing family business? Something flickered in his eyes, a momentary crack in his composed facade. Let's just say I have my reasons. That's not good enough. She stood up, suddenly angry. You're asking me to give up a year of my life. I deserve to know why. William rose to his feet in one fluid motion, towering over her. The terms are non-negotiable, Miss Bennet. If you want to walk away, the door is right there. They stared at each other, neither willing to back down. Eliza knew she should leave. Every instinct told her this arrangement was dangerous. But then she thought of her father in the hospital, her mother's tearful face, the generations of family legacy about to be wiped out. Fine, she said at last, her voice barely above a whisper. I'll sign. William's expression remained unreadable as he handed her a pen. Initial each page, then sign at the bottom. Eliza's hand trembled slightly as she flipped through the pages. With each initial, she felt as if she were giving away pieces of herself. When she finally signed her name on the last page, the finality of it hit her like a physical blow. Congratulations, Miss Bennet, William said, taking the contract and placing it in a folder. You've just saved your family. At what cost? She murmured. That remains to be seen. He pressed a button on his desk. Charlotte will show you out. A car will pick you up from your apartment tomorrow morning at 9. Pack for all seasons. We'll be dividing our time between my properties. So,
soon?
Eliza hadn't expected to leave her life behind so quickly. The sooner we begin, the sooner it ends, he replied pragmatically. 1 year from tomorrow, you'll be free to return to your life, and your family will be financially secure. As Charlotte appeared to escort her out, William added, One more thing, Miss Bennet. Eliza turned, her hand already on the door. Yes? Trust no one at my estate, not even those who seem friendly. His eyes held a warning. Especially not those who seem friendly. The words sent a chill down her spine, but before she could ask what he meant, Charlotte gently guided her out of the office. On the elevator, ride down, Eliza's reflection stared back at her from the polished doors. A young woman who had just made a deal with a man she knew nothing about. A man who seemed to know far too much about her. As the car drove her home through the bustling city streets, she couldn't shake the feeling that she had just signed something far more binding than a 1-year contract. William Blackwood's eyes had held secrets, and somehow she suspected those secrets involved her in ways she couldn't begin to understand. What she didn't know then was that the contract was only the beginning. That the signature she had placed on that paper would unravel a past she never knew existed and open doors to rooms in the Blackwood mansion that were meant to stay locked forever. The Blackwood estate in the Hamptons emerged from the morning fog like something from another era. As the car rolled through wrought iron gates and up the winding driveway, Eliza took in the sprawling mansion with its imposing colonial architecture and manicured gardens. This would be her home, her prison, for the next year. Welcome to Thornfield Hall, Miss Bennet, the driver said, stopping in front of the grand entrance. A team of staff members waited on the steps, lined up with military precision. At their center stood an older woman with silver hair pulled into a tight bun, her posture rigid and expression unreadable. Miss Bennet, I'm Mrs. Reynolds, the housekeeper, she said as Eliza stepped out of the car. Mr. Blackwood has asked me to see that you're settled in. Eliza nodded, suddenly conscious of her simple dress and how out of place she must look. Thank you. It's a beautiful home. It's been in the Blackwood family for generations, Mrs. Reynolds replied, her tone neither warm nor cold. Your luggage will be taken to your suite. Please, follow me. As they entered the mansion, Eliza was struck by the contrast between the traditional exterior and the modern interior. The foyer opened into a grand hall with soaring ceilings, but the decor was sleek and contemporary, with abstract art and minimalist furniture that probably cost more than her former apartment. "Mr. Blackwood has allocated the east wing for your use," Mrs. Reynolds explained as they climbed a curved staircase. "You'll find everything you need there. The west wing houses Mr. Blackwood's private quarters and is strictly off-limits unless you're specifically invited." "Off-limits," Eliza repeated, unable to keep the edge from her voice. "I'm beginning to feel like I'm in a fairy tale, the kind that doesn't end well." Mrs. Reynolds stopped abruptly, turning to face her. For a moment, something that might have been sympathy flickered in her eyes. "A word of advice, Miss Bennet. Mr. Blackwood values discretion and compliance. It would be in your best interest to respect his boundaries." They continued down a long corridor lined with closed doors until they reached the end. Mrs. Reynolds opened a set of double doors, revealing a suite that was larger than Eliza's entire family home. "Your rooms, the closets, have been stocked according to your measurements. Breakfast is served in the morning room from 7 to 9, lunch at 1, dinner at 7. Mr. Blackwood occasionally dines alone, but when he's present, punctuality is expected." Eliza wandered into the space, taking in the king-sized bed, the sitting area with a fireplace, and the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Atlantic Ocean. "And what exactly am I supposed to do all day?" "That's for Mr. Blackwood to determine. He'll be joining you for dinner tonight. Until then, you're free to explore the grounds and the common areas of the house." Mrs. Reynolds paused, then added, "The library is particularly impressive, second floor, west corridor." After the housekeeper left, Eliza stood alone in the silent suite, the reality of her situation sinking in. She was now the property of William Blackwood, a man who had bought her time and presence like someone might purchase a rare artifact. After unpacking and changing into clothes she found in the closet, all perfectly sized and in styles she would have chosen herself, which was unsettling, Eliza decided to explore. The mansion seemed to go on forever with countless rooms and corridors. Some doors were locked, while others opened to reveal spaces that looked like they hadn't been used in years. As she wandered through a particularly grand corridor adorned with family portraits, she noticed a pattern. Each generation of Blackwood, men had the same steel-grey eyes that William possessed. She stopped before a portrait of a woman from perhaps the 1950s, struck by something vaguely familiar in her features. "That's Eleanor Blackwood," a voice said behind her, causing Eliza to nearly jump out of her skin. She turned to find a young man about her age, dressed in what appeared to be a security uniform. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to startle you," he said with an easy smile. "I'm Jason Parker, head of security." "Eliza Bennet," she replied, extending her hand. "I know who you are, Miss Bennet. Everyone here does." His tone was friendly, but something in his eyes made Eliza remember William's warning. Trust no one. "How much do you know about why I'm here?" she asked carefully. Jason's smile didn't waver. "Only that you're Mr. Blackwood's guest for the foreseeable future. It's not my place to know more." He nodded toward the portrait. Eleanor was William's grandmother. They say he inherited his business acumen from her. Eliza looked back at the portrait. "She's beautiful." She was. Died young, though. Tragic accident. Jason took a step closer. "You know, you kind of resemble her around the eyes." Before Eliza could respond, a door slammed somewhere down the hall and Jason immediately straightened. "I should get back to my rounds." "Nice meeting you, Miss Bennet. I'm sure we'll be seeing a lot of each other." He paused, then added in a lower voice, "If you need anything at all, my office is on the ground floor, East Corridor." As he walked away, Eliza couldn't shake the feeling that there had been a hidden message in his words. Was he offering help, or was this some kind of test? Continuing her exploration, she found the library Mrs. Reynolds had mentioned. It was a two-story room with walls of books and a spiral staircase leading to a second level of shelves. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the estate's gardens, and comfortable reading areas were arranged throughout the space. As she browsed the shelves, Eliza heard voices coming from behind a partially open door at the far end of the library. Curious, she moved closer. "Can't keep her in the dark forever," a woman's voice was saying. "If she finds out on her own..." She won't. William's deep voice was unmistakable. Not unless someone tells her. And what about the others? They've been watching the house since she arrived. Let them watch. She's safe here. Until the anniversary, the woman replied. You know what happens then. I've taken precautions. No one enters this property without my knowledge. It's not about entering, William. It's about what's already inside. The last time... Enough, Charlotte. William's tone was sharp. We're not discussing this further. Eliza took a step backward, accidentally brushing against a table. A book fell to the floor with a loud thud. The voices instantly stopped. Heart racing, Eliza quickly picked up the book and pretended to be reading when the door opened. William stood there, his expression darkening when he saw her. Miss Bennet, he said coolly, I see you've found the library. Mrs. Reynolds suggested it, she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. I hope I'm not intruding. Not at all, this is a common area. His eyes narrowed slightly. Were you listening at the door? Eliza lifted her chin. I heard voices. I wasn't intentionally eavesdropping, if that's what you're implying. Behind him, Charlotte, the assistant from his office, appeared, looking nervous. I should go prepare those documents, she murmured, slipping past them both. Once she was gone, William fixed Eliza with a penetrating stare. What did you hear? Nothing specific, Eliza lied, just muffled voices. He studied her for a long moment, clearly not believing her. Let me be clear, Miss Bennet. There are matters related to my business and personal affairs that don't concern you. Your curiosity could put you in a difficult position. What kind of difficult position? Eliza asked. You brought me here, remember? I didn't ask to be part of whatever is going on. A muscle twitched in his jaw. No, you didn't. But you are now, whether either of us likes it or not. Before she could press further, his phone buzzed. He checked it, his expression hardening. We'll continue this discussion at dinner. 7 o'clock, don't be late. He turned to leave, then stopped. And Eliza, stay out of the West Wing. After he left, Eliza returned to her exploration of the library, but her mind was racing with questions. What was William hiding? Who were the others watching the house? And what was going to happen on the anniversary? She was so lost in thought that she almost missed the small piece of paper that had been slipped beneath a book on the table where she sat. With a quick glance around to ensure she was alone, Eliza unfolded it. Written in neat handwriting were 7 words that made her blood run cold. Leave while you can. He's not safe. The note wasn't signed, and when she looked up, searching for who might have left it, she saw only bookcases and empty reading chairs. But she couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching her from the shadows of the grand room, waiting to see what she would do next. Ruth's. The grandfather clock in the dining room struck 7 as Eliza entered. William was already seated, at the head of the mahogany table that could easily accommodate 20 guests. Tonight only 2 places were set, his at the head and hers to his right. The space between them felt symbolic of the distance he maintained, close enough to observe but too far for genuine connection. You're punctual, he remarked as she took her seat. I appreciate that. Mrs. Reynolds made it clear that punctuality is non-negotiable, Eliza replied, placing her napkin in her lap. She had changed into a midnight blue dress she'd found in her closet, undoubtedly chosen by William, or someone working for him. The thought of him selecting her clothes made her both uncomfortable and curious. William studied her over his wine glass. You've been exploring the house? It wasn't a question, but Eliza nodded anyway. It's quite impressive. The library especially. It was my grandfather's pride and joy. Every Blackwood has added to the collection. He gestured, and a server appeared with the first course, a delicate seafood bisque. Did you find anything of interest during your explorations? The note burned in Eliza's mind. Leave while you can. He's not safe. She hesitated, debating whether to mention it, then decided to test the waters. I met your head of security, Jason Parker. He seemed attentive. Something flashed in William's eyes, irritation perhaps, or suspicion. Parker is efficient at his job, but he has a habit of overstepping. What did he say to you? Nothing significant. He told me about the portrait of your grandmother, Eleanor. He mentioned that I resembled her. William's knuckles whitened around his wine glass. Did he? That was presumptuous of him. Eliza took a sip of her wine, gathering courage. Why am I really here, William? And don't tell me it's for companionship at social events. You've barely acknowledged my presence since I arrived, and from what I can tell, you're not exactly a social butterfly. For a long moment, the only sound was the ticking of the grandfather clock. Then William set down his glass with deliberate care. You signed the contract, Eliza. The terms were clear. My reasons are my own. That's not good enough anymore, she countered, leaning forward. I overheard you and Charlotte talking about someone watching the house, about me being safe here. What are you protecting me from? Or is it who? His jaw tightened. You said you didn't hear anything specific. I lied. A surprised laugh escaped him, short and without humor. At least you're honest about your dishonesty. He sighed, rubbing his temples. What else did you hear? Something about an anniversary, and someone already being inside. Eliza watched his reaction carefully. You've surrounded me. With luxury, but it feels like a gilded cage. I deserve to know why I'm in it. William was silent for so long that Eliza thought he wouldn't answer. Then he stood abruptly. Come with me. He led her from the dining room, through corridors she hadn't yet explored, until they reached a small study tucked away in a corner of the east wing. Unlike the rest of the house with its modern updates, this room felt frozen in time. Wood-paneled walls, vintage furniture, and old photographs in silver frames. This was my father's private study, William said, closing the door behind them. No one comes in here except me. He crossed to a cabinet, unlocked it with a key from his pocket, and removed a thick folder. After a moment's hesitation, he placed it on the desk in front of her. If you want answers, start here. But understand that once you know, there's no going back. Eliza sat in the leather chair and opened the folder. Inside were newspaper clippings, legal documents, and photographs, decades worth, organized chronologically. The oldest clipping, yellowed with age, was a society page announcement from 1952. Blackwood heir weds heiress. Harrison Blackwood, son of industrial magnate George Blackwood, married Eleanor Sullivan, daughter of banking tycoon Edward Sullivan, in a lavish ceremony at St. Patrick's Cathedral. Attached was a wedding photo. Eleanor was the woman from the portrait, young, beautiful, with a delicate face and striking eyes. Her new husband looked strikingly like William. Your grandparents, Eliza murmured, looking up at William, who stood watching her, arms crossed. Keep reading. The next article, dated 2 years later, announced the birth of a son, James Harrison Blackwood. More society pages followed, charting the picture-perfect life of the wealthy family. Then came a stark headline from 1965. Tragedy strikes Blackwood. Family. Eleanor Blackwood, wife of Harrison Blackwood and mother of 11-year-old James, died yesterday in what police are calling a suspicious accident. Eliza's heart pounded as she read the details. A car driven off a cliff, evidence of tampering with the brakes, accusations leveled at business rivals. No arrests were ever made. The material then jumped ahead to the 1980s, James Blackwood's marriage to Catherine Wright, the birth of William, business successes and expansions. But tucked between these were private investigator reports, all focused on the Sullivan family, Eleanor's side. A document caught her eye, a family tree that had been meticulously researched and annotated. She traced the Sullivan line down, from Eleanor, through cousins and distant relatives, until her finger stopped cold on a familiar name, Elizabeth Sullivan Bennett, her mother. This can't be, she whispered, looking up at William, who was watching her intently. Your mother is Eleanor's great-niece, he confirmed quietly. Which makes you Eleanor's great-great-niece. We're distant cousins, Eliza. The room seemed to spin. You knew? All this time you knew we were related? I've known since I was 22, William said, taking a seat across from her. When? My father died. He left me a letter explaining everything, including the reason for Eleanor's death. He reached into the folder and pulled out a sealed envelope. This is for you. My father prepared it years ago in case something happened to him before he could tell you himself. With trembling hands, Eliza broke the seal and unfolded the letter inside. To Elizabeth Bennet. If you're reading this, it means my son has finally found you, and I am no longer here to explain in person. There are truths about our families that have been hidden for generations, truths that have cost lives and destroyed relationships. Eleanor Sullivan Blackwood was murdered because she discovered something that powerful people wanted kept secret. Her family, your family, has been targeted ever since, though many of you never knew why. The financial troubles that have plagued the Bennets for generations were not accidents or poor business decisions, but calculated moves to keep you from accessing what is rightfully yours. The Sullivan Trust was established in 1920 by your great-great-grandfather. It contained not just money, but evidence of corruption that implicated some of the most influential families in America. When Eleanor threatened to expose this evidence, she was silenced. The trust was hidden, its executors sworn to secrecy, with instructions that it could only be accessed by a direct Sullivan descendant on their 30th birthday, with proof of their identity. Eliza, you turn 30 in exactly 50 days. On that day, you become the rightful heir to the Sullivan Trust and to secrets that people are still willing to kill for. I've spent my life trying to unravel this web, to protect my son from the same fate that befell his grandmother. William has continued this work, navigating a dangerous path between appearing loyal to those who would do you harm while working to keep you safe. Trust him, Eliza. Despite the walls he's built, despite the distance he maintains, he is the only person who can protect you. Until your birthday. The contract was the only way to bring you under our protection without alerting those who have been watching your family for decades. The game is more dangerous than you can imagine. Watch your steps carefully. James Blackwood. Eliza looked up from the letter, her mind reeling. This is insane. A hidden trust? People willing to kill for secrets? This sounds like something from a thriller novel, not real life. Williams. Expression remained grave. I wish it were fiction. My father died in a plane crash that was ruled an accident. I've spent the last decade ensuring the same doesn't happen to you. So the financial collapse of my family's business was orchestrated, he finished. When you started asking questions about your family history, they got nervous. Your parents' medical issues? Your father's heart attack happened the day after he requested old family records. Horror washed over Eliza. Are you saying they hurt my parents to stop me from looking into my family's past? I'm saying nothing happens by coincidence when it comes to the Sullivan heirs. William leaned forward. When I learned they were targeting your family again, I had to act. The contract was the only way I could think of to bring you under my protection without raising suspicions. Who is they? Eliza demanded. You keep talking about powerful people, but you haven't named names. William's eyes darkened. The consortium, a group of families whose fortunes were built on the same corruption that Eleanor discovered. They've infiltrated every level of business and government. One of them has someone inside this house, watching, reporting. The note, Eliza whispered, pulling it from her pocket. Is this from them? William took the paper, his expression hardening as he read it. Where did you find this? In the library after you left. Someone slipped it under a book. He crumpled the note in his fist. They're trying to separate us. If you leave the protection of this estate, you'll never make it to your 30th birthday. The weight of everything she'd learned pressed down on Eliza like a physical force. Her entire life had been shaped by events set in motion before she was born. The financial struggles, her parents' health problems, even her meeting with William, all pieces of a puzzle she hadn't known existed. Why didn't you just tell me all this from the beginning? Would you have believed me? William countered. Or would you have thought I was a madman trying to lure you into some elaborate trap? He had a point. Even now, with the evidence before her, part of her wanted to dismiss it as paranoia or manipulation. I need proof, she said finally. Not just old newspaper clippings and a letter from a man I never met. Real proof that what you're saying is true. William nodded slowly. There's a safe room behind my office. Tomorrow, I'll show you everything my father and I have collected over the years. But tonight you should rest. Knowing the truth doesn't make you safer. It just makes you more aware of the danger. As he escorted her back to her suite, Eliza felt the weight of unseen eyes following their every move. The mansion that had seemed merely mysterious now felt ominous, its shadows harboring potential threats. At her door, William paused. I'll assign Parker to monitor your suite tonight. Don't open your door for anyone but me, no matter what they say. Even Mrs. Reynolds, especially Mrs. Reynolds. His eyes held a warning. Remember what I told you on your first day. Trust no one. As Eliza closed and locked her door, she realized that William hadn't included himself in that warning. Did he expect her to trust him implicitly, despite everything he'd hidden from her? Sleep eluded her that night as she replayed everything she'd learned. Her family connected to the Blackwoods, a hidden trust worth killing for, enemies watching from both outside and inside the mansion, and at the center of it all, William Blackwood, a man who had orchestrated her presence here through a contract that now seemed like the least of her concerns. Outside her window, the ocean crashed against the cliffs below the estate, its rhythmic roar a reminder of the forces beyond her control. In just 50 days, she would turn 30 and supposedly gain access to a trust that had cost her great-great-aunt her life. If she lived that long. The safe room behind William's office was less a room and more a fortress, steel-reinforced walls, no windows, multiple security systems, and a door that looked like it belonged in a bank vault. Inside, monitors displayed feeds from security cameras positioned throughout the estate and its grounds. This is where I spend most of my nights, William explained as he led Eliza inside the following morning. Monitoring, planning, collecting evidence. Every wall was covered with information, photographs, documents, maps, and diagrams connected by red string. In the center stood a large table with a timeline spanning decades, marking key events in both the Blackwood and Sullivan families. My God, Eliza breathed, taking it all in. This is obsessive, William supplied with a grim smile. My father started this wall. I've been adding to it since his passing. Eliza approached the timeline, her eyes drawn to a series of photographs, executives, politicians, judges, all connected to 5 central names: Rothwell, Hamilton, Archer, Vance, and Pierce. The consortium, William confirmed, following her gaze. 5 families who've been intertwined with American power structures since the 1800s. What your ancestor discovered was evidence of their involvement in everything from war profiteering to market manipulation to government overthrows. And they've been protecting these secrets for over 70 years, Eliza asked skeptically. Power doesn't exist in 4-year election cycles, Eliza. It exists in generational wealth and influence. These families don't just have money. They control the systems that create and distribute money. He pointed to a map marked with properties across the country. The Rothwells control energy, the Hamiltons, pharmaceuticals. The Archers run the largest private security firm in the world, with contracts in every conflict zone. The Vances control a media empire that shapes public opinion, and the Pierces have judges and politicians in their pockets. Eliza's eyes were drawn to a familiar face among the photographs, a distinguished older man with silver hair. Senator Vance, I've seen him on TV. Thomas Vance, William nodded. Currently the most visible member of the consortium. He's made it his personal mission to acquire the Sullivan evidence. His grandfather was implicated in Eleanor's files. And he's willing to... Eliza couldn't bring herself to say the word. Yes, William replied simply. The Vances have always preferred direct action. The others operate more subtly. Eliza moved deeper into the room, examining the evidence William had accumulated. Financial records showing systematic attacks on Sullivan descendants. Police reports mysteriously altered. Accidents that, viewed collectively, formed a pattern, too consistent to be coincidence. 43 Sullivan descendants have died under suspicious circumstances, Since 1965, William said quietly. Heart attacks in healthy 30-year-olds, car accidents where the brakes failed, carbon monoxide leaks in newly inspected homes. A chill ran through Eliza. And my parents? William hesitated. Your father's heart attack wasn't natural. They introduced a compound that mimics cardiac arrest but leaves no trace after 24 hours. Your mother's deteriorating health is likely the result of slow-acting toxins. Oh my God, Eliza whispered, steadying herself against the table. Can it be reversed? I have specialists working on it. The moment you signed the contract, I had them admitted to a private medical facility under aliases. They're safe and receiving treatment. Eliza looked up sharply. You moved my parents without telling me. It was necessary. The consortium was watching them to get to you. A whirlwind of emotions swept through her, rage at the people who had hurt her family, fear for her parents' lives, and confusion about William's role in all of this. Why do you care? She finally asked. Why risk your life to protect a distant cousin you barely know? William turned away, his shoulders tense. My father spent his life trying to right the wrongs committed by his father. Harrison Blackwood was a member of the consortium before he married Eleanor. When she discovered what they were doing, he chose the organization over his wife. He helped orchestrate her accident. Your grandfather was involved in your grandmother's death, Eliza asked, horrified. Yes. My father didn't learn the truth until after Harrison died. It destroyed him. William's voice grew quiet. He dedicated his life to finding the Sullivan heirs and protecting them until one could claim the trust and expose everything. I promised him I would finish what he started. He turned back to face her, his expression more open than she'd ever seen it. This isn't just about honoring my father's wishes, Eliza. It's about justice. These families have manipulated world events, started wars, crashed economies, all to increase their power. They need to be exposed. Something in his intensity made Eliza wonder if there was more to his motivation than he was saying. There's something else, isn't there? She pressed. Something personal. His jaw tightened. The plane crash that killed my father wasn't an accident either. Understanding dawned. You want revenge. I want justice, he corrected, though his eyes told a different story. But first we need to keep you alive until your birthday. The consortium knows the deadline is approaching. They'll be desperate. And one of them has someone inside this house, Eliza remembered. How do we find out who? William moved to a computer terminal and pulled up files. I've been narrowing it down. There are 27 staff members at this estate. I've cleared 16 of them, long-time employees with no suspicious connections. That leaves 11 possibilities. He displayed photographs of the remaining suspects, among them Mrs. Reynolds, Charlotte, and Jason Parker. You suspect your head of security? Eliza asked, surprised. I suspect everyone, William replied grimly. Parker was hired after my father's death. His credentials are impeccable, almost too perfect, and he's shown unusual interest in you. Eliza remembered Jason's offer of help. Had it been genuine, or was he trying to gain her trust for more sinister reasons? What about Mrs. Reynolds? She's been steering me since I arrived. She's been with the family for 40 years, but she was close to my grandfather. Her loyalties are complicated. And Charlotte? My assistant has access to my schedule, my contacts, my movements. If she's compromised, we're already exposed. Eliza studied the faces, trying to see deceit behind their expressions. So what's our next move? We feed them false information, different stories to different suspects, and see which version reaches the consortium. William pulled up a calendar. There's a benefit gala next week in Manhattan. We'll attend as planned, your first public appearance as my companion. It'll be the perfect opportunity to put our plan in motion. As William outlined his strategy, Eliza couldn't help but notice how the rigid businessman she'd first met had transformed into something else entirely, a strategist, a protector, perhaps even an ally. Later that afternoon, as they walked the grounds together, Maintaining the appearance of a normal employer-companion relationship for any watching eyes, Eliza found herself studying William's profile. "Why the contract?" she asked. "Why not just tell me the truth from the beginning?" William glanced at her. "Would you have believed me? A stranger claiming your family was being targeted by a secret organization? You would have thought I was delusional. You could have shown me evidence and risked exposing that I knew about your connection to the Sullivan Trust." He shook his head. "The consortium has eyes everywhere. The contract gave us a plausible reason for your presence here that wouldn't raise suspicions." They reached the cliff edge overlooking the ocean. In the distance, a speedboat cut through the waves too far to identify its occupants. "I've spent 10 years preparing for your 30th birthday," William said quietly, "creating a protective bubble around you without your knowledge, making financial decisions for your family's company that appeared to be failures, but were actually designed to keep you under the radar. So you manipulated my life," Eliza said, a hard edge to her voice. "I protected your life," he countered. "Every step I've taken has been to ensure you survive to claim what's yours. And after that, once I claim this trust and expose the consortium, what happens then?" William's eyes met hers, something unreadable in their depths. "Then you'll be free. Your family will be safe. The contract will be fulfilled." For some reason, his matter-of-fact answer left Eliza feeling strangely hollow. She turned away, looking out over the water. "And if I don't want to be free?" The words escaped before she could stop them. William fell silent, and when she turned back, she found him watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. For a moment, it seemed he might step closer, might bridge the careful distance he'd maintained since her arrival. Instead, his phone buzzed. He checked it, his expression immediately hardening. "We need to go back now." "What's wrong?" "Security breach at the east perimeter," he said, already moving quickly toward the house. "Someone tried to get onto the property." As they hurried back, Eliza caught sight of Jason Parker organizing a team of security personnel near the gate. His expression was tense, focused. When he saw William, he jogged over to meet them. "Perimeter sensors were triggered at 3 points simultaneously," he reported. "Looks like a coordinated attempt to test our defenses. No one got through, but we found this." He handed William a small metal object. From Eliza's angle, it looked like a tracking device. William's face darkened. "Get Miss Bennett inside. Full lockdown." "Protocol." As Jason escorted her toward the house, Eliza glanced back at William, who was examining the device with cold fury. For the first time, she saw not just the businessman or the strategist, but a glimpse of the dangerous adversary he could be. That evening, as security teams swept the grounds, Eliza paced her suite, replaying everything she'd learned: the consortium, the Sullivan Trust, the traitor within the mansion. It was overwhelming, yet somehow less frightening than the realization that had struck her at the cliff's edge. The realization that somewhere along the way, her feelings toward William Blackwood had become dangerously complicated. A soft knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. She approached cautiously. "Who is it?" "Charlotte, Mr. Blackwood asked me to deliver these security protocols." Eliza hesitated, remembering William's warning about trusting no one. "Slide them under the door." There was a pause, then, "He said to give them to you personally. There's information that shouldn't be written down." Warning bells rang in Chennai. Eliza's mind. William would never send sensitive information through someone else, especially not someone he suspected might be compromised. "One moment," she called, grabbing her phone to text William. Before she could send the message, her phone died, despite having been fully charged minutes earlier. Cold fear washed over her as she realized what was happening. "Charlotte, I'm not feeling well," she improvised. "Can you tell William I'll look at the protocols in the morning?" Another pause, longer this time. Then, in a voice that had dropped all pretense of friendliness, "Open the door, Miss Bennett, now." Heart pounding, Eliza backed away. The handle jiggled as someone tried to force it. Then came a different sound, a key card being swiped. The lock disengaged with a soft click. The door began to open. Eliza grabbed a heavy crystal vase from a nearby table and positioned herself behind the door. She had one chance to get this right. The figure that stepped into the room wasn't Charlotte, but a man Eliza had never seen before. Tall, muscular, dressed in black tactical gear. He moved with quiet precision, a gun with a silencer in his hand. Eliza swung the vase with all her strength, connecting with the back of his head. The intruder stumbled forward, his weapon clattering to the floor. Before he could recover, Eliza bolted for the door, only to find her path blocked by Charlotte, also armed. "That was unfortunate," Charlotte said calmly. "We would have preferred to do this quietly." Behind her, the man was rising to his feet, fury in his eyes. "You little—" "Enough," Charlotte cut him off. "Senator Vance wants her unharmed." She smiled coldly at Eliza. "For now." The man pulled out a syringe. "Just a little something to help you sleep, Miss Bennett. Don't fight it, and this will go much easier." As he approached, Eliza backed up until she hit the wall. There was nowhere left to run, no way to call for help. In that moment, she realized how naive she had been to think that luxurious surroundings meant safety. And then the lights went out. In the sudden darkness, Eliza heard a commotion, a grunt of pain, a body falling, the sound of a struggle. When Ning Santintais emergency lighting flickered on seconds later, William stood in the doorway, a gun in his hand. Both Charlotte and the intruder lay unconscious on the floor. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, crossing to her in 2 quick strides. She shook her head, trembling with adrenaline. "How did you know?" Parker reported Charlotte using a restricted access code to enter this wing. His eyes were dark, with barely controlled fury. "I was already on my way when the power was cut." Security personnel flooded the room, securing the intruders. Jason Parker appeared, looking genuinely shocked at the sight of Charlotte. "Sir, there's a boat missing from the marina. They must have had more accomplices." William nodded grimly. "Lock these 2 in the secure holding room, full biometric. Monitoring. I want them conscious but contained until I decide what to do with them." As the team carried out his orders, William turned back to Eliza. "This safe house has been compromised. We need to leave. Now." "Where will we go?" "Somewhere. They won't expect." His expression was resolute. "Pack only what you need. We move in 10 minutes. As she quickly gathered essentials, Eliza realized that the game had changed. The enemy wasn't just watching anymore, they were acting. And William had been right about one thing. There was a traitor in the house. But it wasn't just Charlotte. Someone had given her access to this wing, had cut the power at precisely the right moment, had coordinated with the team on the boat. The traitor was still among them, and as she followed William to a waiting helicopter on the estate's landing, Eliza couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into an even more dangerous situation, one where it would be impossible to know whom to trust. The Manhattan skyline glittered in the distance as the helicopter approached, a stark contrast to the darkness Eliza felt closing in around her. Beside her, William sat in tense silence, his eyes constantly scanning the airspace around them, one hand never far from his weapon. "We're not going to another Blackwood property, are we?" Eliza asked, raising her voice over the rotor noise. William shook his head. "Every location associated with me will be watched. We're going somewhere the consortium would never think to look." The helicopter veered away from the glittering towers of Midtown, heading instead toward Brooklyn. It descended onto the rooftop of what looked like an abandoned warehouse in Red Hook, where a middle-aged man with salt and pepper hair waited beside a nondescript sedan. "This is Daniel Frost," William explained as they hurried from the helicopter pad. "He was my father's most trusted operative. Now he's mine." Daniel nodded curtly at Eliza. "Miss Bennett, it's an honor to finally meet you. Your parents send their regards." "My parents?" Eliza's heart leapt. "They're okay." "Stable and improving," Daniel confirmed. "The specialists are optimistic." As they drove through the late-night streets of Brooklyn, William outlined the situation. Charlotte was Vance's plant. She's been feeding him information for at least 2 years. The man with her was a consortium extraction specialist. They send him when they want someone taken alive. "But someone helped them get into my wing," Eliza pointed out. "Someone cut the power." "I know. William's expression was grim. "We still have a second traitor to identify." They pulled up to a pre-war apartment building in Park Slope, unremarkable among its neighbors. Inside, Daniel led them to the third floor and unlocked a door to reveal a surprisingly spacious apartment with modern furnishings. "This safe house is registered to a shell corporation 5 layers removed from any Blackwood connection," Daniel explained. "Not even Parker knows about it." The name caught Eliza's attention. "You don't suspect Jason?" William and Daniel exchanged a look. "Parker joined my security team 3 years ago with impeccable credentials," William said carefully. "Too impeccable, in hindsight. After tonight, I'm not ruling anyone out." Daniel moved to a hidden panel in the wall, revealing a sophisticated security system. "The apartment is secure, bulletproof windows, reinforced doors, independent power supply. I'll take first watch." After he left them alone, Eliza wandered to the windows, looking out at the quiet Brooklyn street below. It all felt surreal. Just weeks ago, she had been worried about her family's financial troubles. Now she was in hiding from a powerful shadow organization, days away from her 30th birthday and the inheritance that might get her killed. "I never wanted this for you," William said quietly, coming to stand beside her. "My father hoped we could resolve this without involving you directly, that we could neutralize the consortium before your birthday." "Why didn't you?" Eliza asked. "You've had years to gather evidence." "Evidence isn't enough. These people own judges, control media outlets, can make scandals disappear overnight." His frustration was palpable. "We needed the original Sullivan documents, the ones that trace the money, prove the connections, establish the pattern of corruption. Without those, it's our word against theirs." "And those documents are in the trust I can access when I turn 30, Eliza concluded. "Yes, the trust was designed to be accessible only to a Sullivan heir who reaches 30 with genetic verification. Eleanor knew her husband and his associates would try to destroy the evidence, so she created a failsafe." Eliza turned to face him. "But why wait until I'm 30? Why not just give me access now?" "Banking laws, trust regulations. The legal structure Eleanor created is ironclad. Not even I could change the terms." William ran a hand through his hair. The birthday requirement was deliberate. Eleanor believed that by 30 a person would have the maturity to handle what's in those files and the judgment to know what to do with it. "If I live that long," Eliza murmured. William's eyes met hers, intensity burning in their depths. "You will. I swear it." Something in his voice made her heart skip. Over the past weeks, she had seen William transform from a cold, distant businessman into someone else entirely, someone passionate about justice, fiercely protective, occasionally vulnerable. The walls he had built were crumbling, revealing glimpses of the man beneath the carefully controlled exterior. "Why did you really bring me to Thornfield Hall?" she asked softly. The truth this time. He hesitated, then moved to a sideboard where he poured 2 glasses of whiskey, handing one to her. "When I was 25, I found my father's research on the Sullivan descendants. There were dozens of potential heirs, but most had died under suspicious circumstances before reaching 30. You were different. Somehow the consortium had lost track of your branch of the family." "Because my mother changed her name when she married." William nodded. "That, and my father deliberately obscured your family's connection to the Sullivans. He created a paper trail suggesting your line had ended generations ago." "So how did you find me?" "DNA database," William admitted. "Your cousin's genealogy hobby led her to submit a sample. It flagged in our system." Eliza remembered her cousin Rebecca's obsession with tracing their family tree. "And then what? You just decided to insert yourself into my life." "I observed from a distance at first, making sure you were safe, diverting consortium attention when they got too close." William took a sip of his whiskey. "But then something unexpected happened." "What?" His eyes met hers over the rim of his glass. "I saw you at a charity function in Boston 3 years ago. You were volunteering, helping children with art projects. I'd planned to maintain my distance to protect you without direct contact. But watching you that day..." He trailed off. "What?" Eliza pressed. I realized I wanted to know you, not just protect you. The admission seemed to cost him something. It wasn't part of the plan. It complicated everything. Eliza felt heat rise to her cheeks. So all this time, while you were orchestrating my life from the shadows, I was fighting a personal battle as well, he finished. Trying to keep my distance emotionally while drawing closer physically. The contract was meant to create boundaries, to remind us both that our connection was temporary, professional. And did it work? She asked, stepping closer. His jaw tightened. You know it didn't. The moment hung between them, charged with unspoken feelings. Then William's phone buzzed, breaking the tension. His expression changed as he read the message. Daniels detected unusual activity on the building's security cameras. We may have been compromised already. How is that possible? We just got here. I don't know, but we need to move. He was already gathering their few belongings. There's a secondary location. The apartment door burst open with such force that it tore from its hinges despite the reinforcements. Daniel stumbled in, blood streaming from a cut on his forehead. They're here, he gasped. At least 6 of them. They took out the security system somehow. William pulled his gun, pushing Eliza behind him. The fire escape. Covered, Daniel confirmed grimly. They've got the building surrounded. William's mind worked rapidly. The panic room. Daniel, buy us 2 minutes. Daniel nodded, drawing his own weapon as William led Eliza to what looked like a closet. Inside, he pressed a hidden panel, revealing a metal door that slid open silently. Get in, he ordered. This room is impenetrable. Once sealed, not even a bomb could breach it. Eliza stepped inside, then turned back when she realized William wasn't following. What are you doing? Buying time. When the door closes, it won't open again for at least 4 hours. That's enough time for my backup. Team to respond. Horror dawned on Eliza's face. You're not coming with me. I can't. Someone needs to make sure they don't breach this room before the lockdown sequence completes. William, no, she protested, reaching for him. You'll die. His hand cupped her cheek briefly. Some things are worth dying for. Before she could react, he stepped back and hit a button on the wall. The metal door began to slide closed between them. William! Eliza lunged forward, but the gap was already too narrow. His eyes met hers one last time. I need you to know it was never just about the contract for me. The door sealed with a hiss, cutting off whatever else he might have said. Eliza pounded against it uselessly, tears streaming down her face. Through the soundproofed walls, she could hear nothing of what was happening outside, but her imagination filled in the blanks with terrifying clarity. She slid to the floor, overwhelmed by helplessness. The man who had devoted years to protecting her was now sacrificing himself for the same cause. And she was trapped, unable to help, unable even to tell him how her own feelings had evolved from resentment to something far more complex. The panic. Room was well equipped. Communications systems, monitors showing security feeds from throughout the building, supplies for days. But every screen showed only static. Whatever the consortium had used to disable the building's security had affected the panic room's systems as, well, all except one. A small monitor in the corner still functioned, displaying what appeared to be a countdown, 47:18:26, 47 hours, 18 minutes, and 26 seconds, the timer to her 30th birthday. As Eliza watched the seconds tick away, her mind raced. What would happen when the countdown reached 0? Would the room automatically unseal? Would the trust magically appear? Or was this just another layer of Eleanor's elaborate protection system? Hours passed with agonizing slowness. The panic room had no sounds, except the hum of air circulation and the occasional beep from the countdown timer. Eliza alternated between pacing the small space and sitting with her head in her hands, imagining worst-case scenarios. Was William alive? Had Daniel survived? How had the consortium found them so quickly? The answer came to her in a flash of insight so sudden that she gasped aloud. The tracker. Jason Parker had shown William a tracking device found on the perimeter of Thornfield Hall. What if it wasn't left by attackers testing their defenses? What if Parker himself had planted it, then discovered it to reinforce his cover? It would explain how the consortium kept finding them. Parker knew about the helicopter, knew which direction they were heading, could have easily planted another tracker on the aircraft. But if Parker was the second traitor, then why had he warned William about Charlotte using the restricted access code? Unless that was part of the plan too, Eliza murmured to herself. The pieces fell into place with horrifying clarity. What if the attack at Thornfield Hall wasn't meant to succeed? What if it was a calculated move to force William to evacuate to a backup location, one that Parker knew about? The 4-hour lockdown period passed, but the door remained sealed. The countdown continued. 32, 47, 15. Hunger and exhaustion eventually overtook Eliza. She dozed fitfully on the small cot in the corner, her dreams filled with pursuers and locked doors, and William's eyes in that final moment before the door closed. Between them. She awoke to a change in the air circulation, a subtle shift in pressure that made her ears pop. The countdown now read 0.1403, less than 15 minutes until her birthday. The small communications panel beside the door suddenly crackled to life. "Eliza, can you hear me?" The voice was distorted, but unmistakably William's. She lunged for the panel. "William, you're alive?" "For now." He sounded strained, possibly injured. "Listen carefully. When the timer hits 0, the room will unseal. You need to be ready." "Ready for what? What's happening out there?" A pause. "The consortium has control of the building. They're waiting for the panic room to open." "Then I'll stay inside," Eliza decided. "We can wait for help." "There is no help coming," William said grimly. "They've made sure of that, but they've miscalculated one thing." "What?" "They think the Sullivan Trust is a physical document. Papers, evidence that can be destroyed. They don't understand what Eleanor really created." The timer beeped as it crossed below 10 minutes. "William, I don't understand. What am I supposed to do when this door opens?" "Trust yourself," he said, his voice fading in and out. "Eleanor built this failsafe for exactly this scenario. When the clock hits 0 on your 30th birthday, you'll know what to do." "That's so not helpful," Eliza cried, frustration mounting. "Give me something concrete." Another pause, longer this time. Then, "Remember what the Sullivan Trust really is, Eliza. It's not just evidence, it's power. The power Eleanor was killed for trying to use." The comm system abruptly cut out. "William, William!" Eliza pounded on the panel, but there was no response. The countdown continued its relentless progression. 5 minutes, 3 minutes, 1 minute. As it reached 10 seconds, a compartment in the wall slid open, revealing a small metal object, a pendant on a chain. Eliza recognized it instantly as identical to one she had seen in Eleanor's portrait. With trembling fingers, she lifted it. The pendant was warm to the touch, vibrating slightly, as if alive. When she turned it over, she found an inscription. "Truth is power. Power is truth." The timer hit 0. A series of mechanical clicks sounded as the panic room's locks disengaged. The door began to slide open, revealing the apartment beyond, and the people waiting there. Jason Parker stood front and center, a triumphant smile on his face. Behind him were 4 armed men in tactical gear. And seated in an armchair, looking every bit the distinguished statesman from his campaign posters, was Senator Thomas Vance. "Miss Bennett," Vance greeted her cordially. "Happy birthday." Eliza's eyes searched the room frantically. William was there, on his knees, hands bound. Behind him, blood trickled from a cut above his eye, and the way he held himself suggested broken ribs. Daniel lay unconscious or worse in the corner. "Senator Vance," she acknowledged, clutching the pendant tightly in her palm. "I'd say it's a pleasure, but we both—" "No, that would be a lie." Vance chuckled. "Spirited, like your great-great-aunt. I hope you're more reasonable than she was." "What do you want?" "Don't insult my intelligence by pretending you don't know." Vance rose from the chair with the fluid ease of a man accustomed to power. "The Sullivan Trust. The documents Eleanor stole from my grandfather. the evidence she threatened to expose. "And if I give it to you?" "Then Mr. Blackwood here gets to live," Vance gestured casually to William. "Refuse, and Parker will put a bullet in his head while you watch." William's eyes met Eliza's, sending a silent message. "Don't give them anything." "The trust isn't what you think," Eliza said carefully, stepping fully out of the panic room. "It's not papers or documents, it's this." She held up the pendant, for all to see. Vance frowned. "A necklace? You expect me to believe that?" "It's more than a necklace. It's a key, encoded with Eleanor's genetic signature, and programmed to activate only in the hands of a Sullivan heir on their 30th birthday." The words came to Eliza as if someone else were speaking through her. She realized with startling clarity that she knew things she hadn't known moments ago, as if the pendant itself were transferring knowledge directly to her mind. "A key to what?" Vance demanded. Eliza smiled, feeling a surge of power unlike anything she'd experienced before. "To the truth. To every transaction, every bribe, every assassination your consortium has orchestrated for the past century. Eleanor didn't just gather evidence, Senator. She created a backdoor into your entire operation." She closed her fingers around the pendant, feeling it pulse in response. She was ahead of her time, understanding that power in the modern age would be about information, not physical evidence. "This pendant contains access codes to accounts, records, and communications that your consortium thought were secured. With it, I can release everything to every news outlet in the world with a single command." Vance's confident expression faltered. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" Eliza felt knowledge continuing to flow into her consciousness. Accounts numbers, security codes, locations of servers. Shall I start with the offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, or perhaps the blackmail material? You've collected on Supreme Court justices? Or maybe the chemical weapons program your family has been funding in violation of international law? Parker raised his gun, pointing it at William's head. "Give us the pendant, Miss Bennett, now." William's eyes never left hers. Despite his injuries, his expression held absolute faith in her. Eliza took a deep breath. "The pendant is biometrically linked to me now. If anyone else touches it, or if I die, it automatically triggers a dead man's switch. Everything gets released instantly." She could see the calculation in Vance's eyes as he weighed her words. "What do you want?" "First, William and Daniel go free, unharmed. Then we negotiate." "You're in no position to make demands," Vance snapped, but uncertainty had crept into his voice. "I'm in exactly the position Eleanor designed me to be in." Eliza stood taller, channeling the strength of the woman who had created this legacy. She knew this moment would come. She prepared for it across generations. A tense silence filled the room. Then slowly, Vance nodded to Parker, who reluctantly lowered his weapon. "Release him," Vance ordered. Parker cut William's bonds. He rose unsteadily, moving to check on Daniel, who Eliza was relieved to see was still breathing. "He needs medical attention," William said, his voice rough with pain. "He'll get it," Eliza assured him, never taking her eyes off Vance. "After the senator and I come to an understanding." William looked between them. "Eliza, you can't trust him." "I don't," she replied calmly, "but he understands self-preservation." She turned back to Vance. "Don't you, Senator?" The older man's face was a mask of controlled fury. "What exactly do you propose?" Eliza felt the pendant grow warmer in her hand, as if responding to her intentions. "A new contract, one that ensures your consortium never threatens another, Sullivan descendant or anyone else ever again. And why would we agree to that? Because the alternative is watching everything you've built collapse, while you spend the rest of your life in prison." Eliza stepped closer, the pendant glowing faintly between her fingers. "Eleanor built this system to be irrefutable. The evidence is authenticated, time-stamped and backed up on servers around the world. Even your most loyal judges couldn't dismiss it." Vance's eyes narrowed to slits. "You're asking me to dismantle a century of power and influence. I'm giving you a chance to save what matters most to you, your legacy, your freedom." Eliza's voice was steady, despite the rapid beating of her heart. Your consortium will divest from all illegal operations. You'll step down from public office and you'll ensure that no one ever comes after me or any other Sullivan descendant again. Or what? You'll release everything? Vance scoffed. You'd be destroying countless lives, destabilizing global markets. Are you prepared for that kind of responsibility? Eliza hadn't considered that angle. The ramifications of exposing the consortium's entire network would indeed be far-reaching. But then she felt the pendant pulse again, as if responding to her doubt, and suddenly she understood Eleanor's true intention. The system is designed to release the evidence selectively, she realized aloud, targeting only the key players while minimizing collateral damage. Eleanor wasn't vindictive, she wanted justice, not chaos. Vance's expression told her she was right. You have 24 hours to begin implementing my terms, Eliza continued, confidence growing with each word. The pendant will monitor compliance. Any deviation, any attempt to retaliate, and the system activates. It's automated. Even I couldn't stop it once triggered. William had moved to stand beside her, his presence a silent reinforcement of her position. Vance looked between them, defeat finally settling in his eyes. You've won this round, Miss Bennett. But remember, power changes people. That pendant might protect you from us, but who will protect you from yourself? I will, William said quietly, his hand finding hers. Parker and the other men backed away, clearly awaiting orders. Vance stood, straightening his suit as if trying to reclaim some dignity. I'll need the specific terms in writing, he said stiffly. You'll have them, Eliza replied. Now get out of my sight. After they left, taking a still unconscious Charlotte with them, Eliza's knees finally gave way. William caught her, wincing at the pain from his own injuries. You did it, he murmured against her hair. Eleanor would be proud. Eliza looked down at the pendant, still warm in her palm. It's not over. The consortium might agree to my terms, but there will always be someone else, someone willing to kill for what this represents. Then we'll face them together. William tilted her face up to his. If you want me to stay. The question hung between them, a future neither had dared imagine just weeks ago when she had signed that first contract. I think we need a new agreement, Eliza said softly. What terms did you have in mind? His eyes searched hers. No. More secrets. No more distance, and absolutely no more treating me like someone who needs to be protected. She slipped the pendant around her neck, where it settled as if it had always belonged there. We're partners in this, equals. William's smile transformed his face, erasing the years of solitude and vigilance. I believe those terms are acceptable. Miss Bennett, then I think we have a deal, Mr. Blackwood. As his lips met hers, Eliza felt the weight of generations lifting from her shoulders. The contract that had brought them together had been fulfilled, but the bond they had forged would extend far beyond any legal document. Outside, dawn was breaking over Brooklyn, painting the skyline in shades of gold and promise. Eleanor's legacy was secure, not just in the pendant around Eliza's neck, but in the truth it had helped reveal, that some connections are stronger than fear, some secrets worth protecting, and some contracts meant to be transformed into something far more binding, something that, unlike the paper agreement that had started their journey, neither of them would ever want to break. 6 months later, Eliza stood at the edge of the cliff behind Thornfield Hall, watching waves crash against the rocks below. The mansion had been transformed, no longer a fortress against unseen enemies, but a home filled with light and purpose. William approached, wrapping his arms around her from behind. Daniel called. The last of the consortium's illegal operations has been dismantled. Vance has announced his retirement from politics. And the others? Following the terms to the letter, the pendant hasn't detected any violations. Eliza touched the necklace that hadn't left her throat since her birthday. I still can't believe Eleanor created something so advanced for her time. It's like she saw the future. She understood power, William said, resting his chin on her shoulder, and she trusted that someday someone in her bloodline would use it wisely. Turning in his arms, Eliza studied the face that had become as familiar to her as her own. The coldness was gone from his eyes, replaced by a warmth she treasured. "What happens now?" she asked. "With the consortium neutralized and my parents recovered, we've fulfilled our purpose." William smiled, taking her hand. "I believe that's entirely up to us. The contract that brought you here expired long ago, and yet I'm still here, for which I am profoundly grateful." He pressed a kiss to her palm. "I've been thinking. The Sullivan Trust contains more than just evidence against the consortium. Eleanor had investments, properties, resources that have grown exponentially over the decades. I know I've been exploring the database. What if we use those resources to continue what she started, not just exposing corruption, but actively working to balance the scales of power?" Eliza considered the idea. A foundation, perhaps. One that uses information and financial leverage to protect those who can't protect themselves. Exactly. William's eyes lit with enthusiasm. "We have the infrastructure, the knowledge, and now the resources. We could make a difference." "Partners in truth and power," Eliza mused, liking the sound of it. "Partners in everything." William reached into his pocket, withdrawing a small velvet box. "If you'll agree to one more contract." Her breath caught as he opened it to reveal a ring, elegant, vintage, with a design that complemented her pendant perfectly. "This belonged to my grandmother, not Eleanor, but my maternal grandmother," he explained. "A woman of integrity and warmth who would have adored you." Dropping to one knee, William looked up at her with all the emotion he had once hidden so carefully. "Eliza Bennett, will you sign this final contract? Not for a year, but for a lifetime." Tears blurred her vision as she pulled him to his feet. "William Blackwood, I believe those terms are more than acceptable." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, Eliza knew that the document they had signed all those months ago, the contract that had seemed so binding and restrictive, had been merely the first paragraph in a much longer story. One they would continue writing together, word by word, day by day, bound not by paper and signatures, but by something far more powerful. A choice freely made, a promise willingly kept, a love that, unlike any contract, needed no enforcement. Clause to ensure it would endure. The end. Dear listeners, we hope Elizabeth and William's journey has captivated your imagination. Their story of secrets, trust, and unexpected love reminds us that sometimes the most binding contracts are the ones written not on paper, but in our hearts. If this tale of mystery and romance resonated with you, please subscribe to our channel for more emotionally rich stories that explore the complexities of human connection. Give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed this suspenseful ride, and share your thoughts in the comments below. What would you have done with Eleanor's pendant? Would you have trusted William from the start? Your engagement keeps these stories alive, and we can't wait to bring you another compelling narrative tomorrow. Until then, remember that the most powerful truths are often hidden in plain sight.